My name is Andrea Sellers. I am the Assistant Director for Regional Engagement at NC State's Alumni Association. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight on behalf of the NC State Alumni Association. Just a few housekeeping things before we go ahead and get started. Please feel free to utilize the Q&A function if you are using Zoom, or the chat function if you are using YouTube, to submit any questions you might have for Dr. Nacoste or Sam Warren during today's webinar. We'll get to some as we can and as this flows. The recording of this webinar will be available and sent out to all registrants following the conclusion of the event. This will be a 75-minute long webinar, and we are really looking forward to the rest of these. This is the first of 6. Just a quick save the date for everyone. Tomorrow is the NC State Day of Giving. So please, yes, be sure to keep an eye on your email and show your support on social media as well. We'll go ahead and get started. I am so excited and happy to introduce to you all Samantha Warren. She is an NC State graduate, class of 2012, and she earned her degree in microbiology. She is a leader within the pharma industry for 20 plus years, and she is the inclusion and diversity practitioner at GSK. When she's not at work, she loves being involved with volunteering and philanthropy. At NC State, she is a member of the Chancellor's African American Community Advisory Council, and she is also the president of the NC State Black Alumni Society. And she is the recipient of the university's inaugural Alumni Legacy Award. In addition to all of that, she is also a member of the GSK PAC's Board of Directors and a member of the Junior League of Raleigh's Board of Directors. She's married to Ken, and they have 2 lovely adult children, Sierra and Cameron. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and good evening, everyone. I'm really excited about kicking off this first of 6 series with Dr. Nacoste. Before we get started, we have to give him a proper introduction, not that he needs it. So NC State's Rupert Nacoste is a social psychologist who teaches a wildly popular social psychology course called Interpersonal Relationships and Race. In his latest book, To Live Woke, Dr. Nacoste uses his experiences from growing up in segregated, Jim Crow regulated Louisiana to serving in the United States Navy to really help us understand that we really need to learn to interact with others who are not like us, whether that difference has to do with race or religion or sexual orientation, ability, or really any number of differences. So tonight, we will kick off a 6-part series where Dr. Nacoste will discuss some concrete strategies for us and for anyone who needs to learn how to recognize and really confront the bigotry that sometimes we're confronted with every day in our social interactions. So specifically tonight, Dr. Nacoste will discuss what he calls the American challenge of the 21st century, and that is neo-diversity. So welcome and hello, Dr. Nacoste. It's an absolute pleasure to finally work with you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My thanks to the Alumni Association for setting up this education series that allows me to talk with community members about the interpersonal, intergroup issues we are struggling with as a nation. You see, I have the long view. I've been working on interpersonal, intergroup issues since my time in the United States Navy, 1972 to 1976. I do indeed have the long view. And in that long view, I can see that we are at another important transition point in dealing with intergroup issues. We as a nation have gone through other transitions before my time, the enslavement of African people onto the emancipation, onto Reconstruction, onto my growing up time of Jim Crow legal racial segregation, onto desegregation, onto conversations about diversity, and now onto conversations about diversity and inclusion. Right now, we are in the newest stage, neo-diversity, an interpersonal situation in which we all have to encounter and sometimes interact with people who are not like us, people who do not look like, sound like, believe like, or love like us. In that new context, the co-occurrence of the COVID-19 social isolation and the very public hideous murder of Mr. George Floyd has created a COVID-19 woke effect. America has been stunned into a new awareness of the sometimes brutal intergroup dynamics that have been a constant in the lives of African Americans. Cutting across all the group identities of American culture, that new startled awareness has activated a hunger to understand and to do something to help end racism. That is where I and my concept of neodiversity can help people find productive ways of thinking and acting in this new intergroup context. My book, To Live Woke, is centered on the concept of neodiversity. With stories from my life and my teaching at NC State, To Live Woke is set up in 46 short essay chapters. I wrote and crafted it that way because there are so many us versus them topics that connect to our nation's neodiversity situation. I also put it together in small bits to give the reader psychological space to pause in, to reflect and process these topics that we all know cause tension. I have the long view. I have been at this work a long time. That is why in my new book, To Live Woke, I can tell stories about my work. When I was asked about a title for this series, I immediately thought about the fact that we are now at another crossroads in America. That made it easy to come up with a title. At a crossroads in 1967, the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. posed this question to America: where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? In my book, To Live Woke, I tell the story of my traveling to Charleston, South Carolina to speak to the student body of the academic magnet high school. How did that come about? And what was my motivation for deciding to go? I tell that story in chapter 6 of To Live Woke. I write it this way: seeing and thinking about the impact of my teaching and writing about neodiversity was having on college students and older people of communities unattached to any college or university, I decided I had a responsibility to go big, realizing that the knowledge technology I had developed about neodiversity helped people. I began to write Taking on Diversity, How We Can Move from Anxiety to Respect. 3 months before the publication of that book, on January 28, 2015, I was the convocation speaker at the academic magnet high school in North Charleston, South Carolina. That came about because I received a request to come to South Carolina from a former NC State student, a student of mine from the 1990s. Yes, I said the 1990s. On December 3rd, 2014, she wrote this to me: Dr. Nacoste, my name is Deborah Ware, and I am currently the Director of Guidance at the Academic Magnet High School in Charleston, South Carolina. I am also a former student of yours, and I'm certain that you would not remember me. It was the early 90s, but I wanted to tell you that your class was by far the most important class I took while at NC State. I don't know if you have heard about the recent controversy surrounding our school. It has been termed Melongate in the media and has upset many in our school community and in the community at large. If you are not familiar with our recent situation, I can send you some of the newspaper articles regarding our situation and would be happy to talk with you about what occurred here at our football games. The reason that I'm reaching out to you today is to invite you to come speak to our student body. It is clear to us that we have a great deal of work to do regarding stereotypes and racial issues, and would like to bring in someone such as yourself who has made it his life's work to study from a social psychological standpoint the impact of race and race relations in today's society. We have a school-wide convocation twice a year, and on January 28th, we will be holding our spring convocation for our students. We would love for you to come and share your knowledge with us and with our students. I hope you will consider coming to speak with our students and would be happy to provide you with any information you need regarding this event. I responded. I said, you were a student of mine in the early 90s? Oh my. I have not heard about the event at your school, so please do send some links along so that I can give this serious consideration. And I will consider it because these problems are cropping up all over America. Turns out you're getting to me at the right time. I have a new book coming out in April about these social dynamics. Let's see what we can work out. To do this would cost me one class meeting of my interdependence and race course. Canceling a class period is something I do only on rare occasions, only for very compelling reasons. Once I read about the situation, I was convinced this was important enough for me to miss that one class period. Funny thing that although the academic magnet high school is a magnet school, somehow it had become a predominantly white school that sits in a predominantly African American neighborhood. In that odd racial context, racial tension was being pushed by something the students themselves were doing. When playing other public high school teams that are predominantly Black, members of the now predominantly white football team would bring out a watermelon at the end of the game to taunt the Black players. With parents of the African American rival teams complaining, the whole North Charleston community was in an uproar with what the local media was calling Watermelon Gate. My former student thought that I might be just the person to come into the school to help these young people understand why the watermelon taunt had now blown up in their faces. Because Ms. Ware, my former student, contacted me before the coming semester, we were able to work it out. I agreed to head down to South Carolina to the Academic Magnet High School spring convocation to be the Academic Magnet High School spring convocation speaker. Here I had an opportunity to reframe the American dream for a group of young people. Politicians have made the idea of the American dream too concrete financial. A chicken in every pot is really not on point, nor is the Oprah Winfrey Land surprise gift, you get a car and you get a car and you get a car. Our real American dream is more abstract, lofty, and interpersonal. Our real American dream is respect. Using that frame, I designed my presentation, Respect for the Real American Dream, to give students a perspective on neodiversity. I wanted those high school students to understand the racial dynamic that their school had become embroiled in when members of their mostly white football team used a watermelon to make a joke aimed at mostly Black football opponents. A few days after I returned to Raleigh, I discovered a student write-up of my speech in their school newspaper, The Talon. I was impressed by the level of sophistication in Ms. Selena Pye's reporting. I was impressed by the way this high school student was able to be so accurate in depicting what happened. Ms. Pye wrote the piece in a way that captured my message, yes, but also my interaction with 600 middle to high school students and the feel of that interaction. Here's an excerpt from her column. No man is an island. Dr. Rupert Nacoste, Academic Magnet High School's 2015 convocation speaker, spoke as he headed toward the center of the Rose Marie Meyer stage. Dr. Nacoste had been teaching social psychology at North Carolina State for 27 years. Today, he taught Academic Magnet High School students and teachers lessons about changing perceptions of diversity. Done.
Please give us one moment and a bit of grace as we deal with technological difficulties. Thank you.
Okay, a couple of questions have come through for me, so I'm happy to gab a little bit as we wait for Dr. Nacoste. Someone on the line has asked how things are at GSK these days, which kind of cracks me up. But I'll say things at GSK are going really, really well. The company is doing well. Like many corporations, we've really kind of doubled down and have recommitted ourselves to having an inclusive work environment. Today, if you look through some of the GSK social channels, you'll actually see quite a bit. We've received some external recognition about the benefits that we offer to families, which are our biggest priority. So check that out on @GSK US on our Twitter feeds. And you'll see something very similar on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. So things are going really well. We still, like most companies, are trying to manage COVID as best we can. Many of us are working remotely until the governor gives us some clearance. So we're taking a staged approach with going back into our office areas, just ensuring that we can socially distance and we're protecting the welfare of our colleagues. Another question has come in. Let's see what it says. What are we doing on the board at State to help the university improve inclusion and diversity? We're actually doing quite a bit. So we're really in a great position with the Black Alumni Society, and that we have regular discussions with the chancellor and also with our vice provost, Dr. Sherry Schwab, where we actually talk about some of the challenges that we're having, particularly with students of color, choosing NC State. And it's very interesting because sometimes we accept students and then they make other choices. So we've really been kind of looking in the mirror, evaluating ourselves and trying to figure out, what it is that we need to do to create a sense of belonging for students of color. So we're doing that. We're also in the process of partnering with the university to develop a racial equity summit. And that will happen, I think it's scheduled for October the 15th. We just had our first meeting about that last week. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're actually listening. So our students, particularly the collective body of Black student leaders on campus, have really shared with us quite frankly and very openly in areas that we've kind of fallen short as a university. And I'm really proud of the university and particularly our chancellor, and that he's taking their concerns really, really quite seriously. He's looked at all of them. He's had meetings with the students and meetings with the Black Alumni Society so that we can come up with kind of creative solutions. So if you take a look on NC State's website, you'll actually be able to see some of the demands that were made by the students and then the university's responses. And then if you follow some of our social media channels, particularly with the Black Alumni Society, you can see some of our responses as well, because we certainly have a responsibility to our alums to keep them connected to the university, but we also want to be a voice for the students that are on campus. So let's see.
I'm back.
Oh, wonderful. Because I'm not quite as interesting as you.
No, that's not true. And my apologies, I don't know exactly what happened, but we live in this weird Zoom world.
We do indeed. It's okay. Well, so you were sharing with us your experiences at the Magnet School.
At the Magnet High School, I was talking about how the students responded to me. I was reading this column from this great column from the student. I'm going to continue with a little bit of that.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, now signs of race, she writes, now signs of racial tension and change will still exist, but they are often most subtle, she said back 4 years ago. Nacoste brought up the example of slurs and stereotypes treated as jokes. Was a cartoon of President Obama as a chimpanzee just a joke? Last May, the North Korean media published disparaging words about the president based on his mixed race, but where did those ideas originate? In North Korea? Nacoste believed that this was an example of America exporting racial stereotypes to be used as slurs against America. Americans today are confused, Nacoste said, because of the dramatic social change. Nacoste explained, people are experiencing confusion and anxiety about prejudice, bigotry, and racism. None of us is without prejudice, he stated. Growing up in Louisiana, he enjoyed a dish called nutria. People recoiled in shock when he revealed that it was a type of rat, demonstrating prejudgment. However, while prejudice is natural to humans, Nacoste explained that it is unfair when it creates a negative evaluation of a whole group of people. and leads to bigotry, the behavioral expression of prejudice by a word or deed. Finally, he clarified that racism is never in a person, even though people want to put things at a personal level. He said racism involves the institutional and organizational perpetuation of discrimination and prejudice. He then faced the crowd, spreading his arms. "Welcome to the future," he said. "It ain't coming, it's here." In America, neodiversity has replaced diversity at the level of Black and white. Now racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, bodily condition, gender, religious, and sexual orientation groups are among the different categories that make up modern neodiversity. Students laughed as Dr. Nacoste recounted when a socially anxious stranger asked him, "How's it going, brother man?" One student in the front row cried, "Oh!" and Nacoste laughed vivaciously as well. He continued, stating that it was an example of how anxiety affected social interaction, then warned, never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. After my presentation, I met with juniors, up-and-coming seniors, they kept calling themselves. It was a lively Q&A. After that, I had lunch with teachers and the brave principal, Ms. Judith Peterson, who had allowed me to come in and shake up her school. It was quite a day. My plan for after was to get to my hotel, gather my things, and then make the 4-hour drive back to Raleigh. Ha! Yeah, right. I was exhausted, too tired to do anything but get a bite to eat and then lay my down. I would drive in the morning. But even exhausted, I was pleased with the day I spent at Academic Magnet High School. I was pleased because I felt real engaged responses from everyone, students, faculty, administrators. I felt that something important could grow from the day I spent there. The next morning, I got up, cleaned up, had breakfast, and hit the highway, I-85, for the 4-hour drive back to Raleigh. Dead stop traffic at 9 a.m. for about 45 minutes. But then the road opened up and I drove into the Raleigh city limits around 2:30 p.m. I got home, Navy showered, changed clothes, got to campus, reviewed my notes in PowerPoint, and at 4:30, walked into the auditorium where I gave my usual big good afternoon greeting to the 200 waiting students enrolled in my Introduction to Social Psychology course. Reading given and returned, I gave the lecture of the day. Miss Selena Pye's column came to my attention the next week. Each time I read Selena's column, I see that my time at the Academic Magnet High School in Charleston, South Carolina was important. I am struck by the message that she and I hope the whole school received from my brief time with them. Ms. Pye wrote, "To achieve the American dream, Nacoste urged the younger generation to respect the world's new neodiverse frontiers. Respect, you see, is the real American dream, to create and live in a nation of people from many different groups, a nation of neodiversity, and to do so with each person respecting the other." I have been at this a long time, and that has been my message for a long time. Sam.
Fantastic. So, Dr. Nacoste, thank you so much for that just thought-provoking introduction. You do, in fact, have the long view. You've been at this game for a really long time. And in your introduction, I love that you made so many mentions of crossroads in America's kind of diversity journey.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say on behalf of everyone that's listening, we really appreciate the fact that you gave up your one class period to those 600 students, to discuss Watermelon Gate. I think that it may have cost you a day, but it'll pay off in dividends because you'll have these students who for the next, several years of their lives will have a really strong sense of how to live woke. So why don't we just dive in? I think before we actually start talking about the meat of the book, if it's all right with you, I'd actually like to talk a little bit about you.
Okay.
So I love that you start the book talking about the early influence of your father, Mr. August Nacoste. Do you mind sharing just a little bit about your work and how it's underpinned by his early influence?
My father, barely high school educated, 11th grade, janitor and bus driver, but a grassroots politician, activist, voting rights. My father campaigned for candidates. My father drove his bus around town to take people to the voting polls. Wow. My father was always about it. And what he did with his children was educate us. He would sit with us and talk about why he was doing what he was doing. He made sure that he taught us that we needed to watch the news. He taught us that we needed to read the newspaper. I'm still a newspaper hound because of my father. And what he showed us, he gave us a model of how to be engaged in this social justice work at a very hard time. I mean, my father was born in 1918.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And so he came up, he could have been a very bitter man, but he never was. He never was. He knew it was in a hard battle. He worked hard, but he took time for himself. But he showed us a way. And I mean, he really taught us. So we did all kinds of stuff with my father. We passed out pamphlets. We put flyers on cars. We went to political meetings when we were old enough. We did, I mean, so my whole being, in a way, when it comes to social justice, rests on what he showed us. He was very interested in politics, that is, getting candidates in office. He didn't tell us that that's what we had to do, but he said we had a responsibility to do something.
Right. So what a blessing to have had such a visionary and courageous father. I assume that as you were coming up in the 1960s, I can imagine that his political involvement wasn't necessarily appreciated by most.
Well, my father, no, it was not. My father, it was so interesting, especially now that I've come to understand it all. My father decided to run for public office in the small town of Opelousas, Louisiana, in the Bayou in 1966.
Wow.
2 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. He stuck his neck out. And no, it was not appreciated. Our house was attacked.
Oh my
Later
goodness.
in this book, I talk about that. I tell that story. But nonetheless, he knew it was important. He knew it was the right thing to do. And that's what he did.
Outstanding. What an amazing example. And I think one of the other things that I gleaned from the book is that your experiences in the United States Navy have also, shaped, the man that you've become and the profession that you've chosen. So would you like to share some reflections on some of those experiences?
Right. Early on, in fact, particularly chapter 1, I talk about my time in the United States Navy. It's all throughout the book, but particularly chapter 1, I'm talking about my time in the United States Navy on board aircraft carriers. I served on board the USS Intrepid. What people don't know is that I was in the Navy in a time of a lot of racial turmoil. Race riots aboard ships carrying weapons of mass destruction. A race riot on board an aircraft carrier at sea. Okay, that's not a good idea. And so the Navy had to didn't have to, but the Navy created, and the reason for that was the leftover bigotry from the days when black men like me could only be cooks. But I was not a cook. I was a clerk typist. And there were people, whites on board ships, who didn't like that idea.
Yeah.
The leftover bigotry was still there. This was a new group of African-American men in the Navy who were not going to put up with a lot of bigotry, and bang. What the Navy did was create a program, an intervention that required all sailors, officers, and enlisted to go through 2.5 days of racial dialogues. I was trained as a facilitator of those racial dialogues, one of many people trained as a facilitator of those racial dialogues. And that's how I got interested in social psychology. But that's where my work, resting on my father's shoulders, that's where my work in the social justice area began, in the United States Navy.
Outstanding. So I just think it's so interesting that you were doing racial dialogues when you were in the Navy, and those same discussions are still happening in corporate spaces and academia, all over the world.
Well, it's so interesting that I think the Navy, because of the Navy was the most recalcitrant when it came to desegregating. So that meant they had many more problems to deal with, and they had to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, they turned out, it pushed them to be ahead of the game.
They were definitely way ahead of their time.
Right, absolutely. It lasted for a couple of years, and then there was a lot of pushback in politics and so on, but for 2 full years, every every member of the Navy went through racial dialogues.
Wow, outstanding. I don't know if that thing, if that such a thing exists now, but I could see it. I could see how it would benefit all of the branches of the military.
Well, no one who not everybody who joins the military is really ready for the mix of people that have. Right.
Yeah, that's true. Uh-oh, I don't know if you can hear me, Dr. Nacoste. You're frozen again.
People are.
Okay, hold tight, everyone. Technical difficulties again, but we'll work through them. Okay, so how about I field a couple of questions? Let's see what we have here. Okay, so here's a comment from Miss Thomas. And she says, Sam, during the break, I listened to your comments, like what you said about African-American students, and I agree that it's important to attract and retain them. It's important to engage the alumni, and as an alum, class of 79, I think many of us have some insight into what it takes to recruit and retain African-American students. I'd like to chat with you more. Back to the lecture. Okay, so Ms. Thomas, I'll definitely take you up on that. Thanks for your comments and your interest and engagement. Let's definitely connect. If you're on LinkedIn, just reach out to me so we can put our heads together. I would love to hear your ideas. Another comment, let's see. Ooh, so Ms. Davis raises an interesting question. And this is a great one for Dr. Nacoste when he returns. And it says, I couldn't agree more with you about respecting others' differences, but doesn't respect look different to different people? And how can anyone be certain that they're showing respect in a way that respect is seen by the receiving person? That's always challenging. It's funny, I talk to a lot of people about this, and sometimes it's just a matter of reading the room. If you're a person who has the ability to read body language, or, just, have some awareness of what a person's feeling, sometimes you can tell right off the bat. If you're lucky, the person that you're talking to or engaging with is courageous enough to let you know when they feel disrespected in a respectful way so that you can receive it. But I think that is an interesting question. Sometimes it is really hard to tell that you've disrespected someone. And I believe that most people engage with the spirit of good intentions. So I think taking that into your engagements definitely help as well. But that would be an interesting one to ask Dr. Nacoste about. Let's see. This is an interesting question from a colleague, Miss Dean. So she asks, was there an event in your work life that pushed you to get involved in corporate inclusion and diversity? And I would actually have to say, my interest was probably piqued from a series of things. So for those that don't know me, I'm actually a scientist turned IND practitioner. So I studied microbiology while I was at NC State, and my goal, I thought, was to work in the hot room at the CDC. I completely romanticized that whole thing. But luckily, I had a mentor at State and College of Agriculture and Life Sciences who suggested that I, just work in the lab, get a feel for it, start really gaining my bench skills. So I did that. And then over the course of a couple weeks, I realized that maybe that wasn't the thing for me, between the smell of agar and the isolation and the repetition that comes with working in a lab, particularly when you don't have advanced skills and an advanced degree, was, not exactly my thing. So I actually was lucky enough to stumble across a temporary position at GlaxoSmithKline, which was Glaxo at the time. And that was my first introduction into pharma. But once I started working in pharma, I connected with several affinity groups. There was one called AAA, which was the African American Alliance. And then there was another one that interests me. And it was called Safe Zone. And it was LGBTQ plus in focus. And through working with those groups, I really started understanding some of the issues in the community, really connecting with the individuals, and really understanding what corporations could do to create a sense of belonging for the employees at the corporation, but also how those employees could help the community as well. So through working with different affinity groups over the course of a number of years, that just really led me to really understand my calling and my passion. So I've been an official member of the Inclusion and Diversity team for the US at GSK for going on 4 years, but I've been connected to them for well over a decade. So it was really just a series of different opportunities that piqued my interest and really helped me hone my craft and understand my calling. Ooh, Mr. Waters, solid point here. He makes a point. There have been a lot of changes at the university since he was there in the mid 60s. And based on what I've heard from specifically from some of the Black alumni that were also at NC State in the late 60s and early 70s, that's absolutely the case. But interestingly, even though I graduated in 2012, I was actually a student at State in the mid 80s. And I have to say that things have changed significantly since I was a student as well. I think the social climate has certainly changed. If you just, has anybody been to the Tally Center lately? I remember when I was a student on campus, we used to have our parties on Friday nights and Saturdays on campus in this little bitty, kind of darkly, dimly lit spot with no air conditioning. And we, of course, had the time of our lives. And now students, have these, amazing technologically advanced spaces to, have their parties, to study, to do their projects, to start a freaking business. NC State is just amazing, and it has grown so much in so many ways. I think socially and politically and entrepreneurially, I'm just really proud, to be an alumnus of NC State. Let's see, what else do we have here? Thank you, Ms. Thompson, for offering some technical support. So she says, I don't know if you can hear me, Dr. Nacoste. She said, log on to Zoom on your phone as well as the laptop and only use the phone audio. It may help. That's what I'm actually doing, Cheryl. So thank you. Let's see. Ooh, Ms. Holtz raises an interesting question about why students don't choose NC State. Of course, the reasons, there's just so many reasons, but oftentimes we hear that for a lot of students, it comes down to finances. And then also, if you think about the caliber of student that we're accepting at NC State right now, irrespective of race or ethnicity, they have options, and they can literally go anywhere in the country. So there are a number of reasons why students don't choose NC State. So we're really trying to hone it into, what it is and how we can create a much, much stronger sense of belonging. The value proposition is already there. I mean, if you've taken a look at Money Magazine, and I think maybe even Forbes magazine, you'll see that NC State is ranked pretty high in terms of the education that you get, the rigor that is offered academically relative to a lot of our peers. So the value proposition is definitely there. Someone asks, what is your role at GSK? So at GSK these days, I call myself an IND practitioner because people kind of understand what that means outside of GSK, but I'm primarily responsible for managing our outreach relationships. GSK has a lot of partnerships with a lot of organizations that support a number of diversity dimensions, and I partner with them on sponsorships. And then the other thing that I do is I manage all of our affinity groups. So GSK has 11 US affinity groups that span a number of diversity dimensions, from ability to generation, to gender, to ethnicity, to LGBTQ+ and beyond. And I provide them with strategic support. I provide them with budgeting, and I create really a year-long strategy for them to help them support the business. So in addition to providing each other support, the affinity groups make large corporations small by, again, creating that sense of community and sense of belonging. They also help us to raise the cultural competency of our overall workforce. So for an example, I self-identify as a Christian, but we have a faith-based affinity group, and I can hear the perspectives and understand challenges that people have with religion. So we have people that talk about their Christianity, their Buddhism, their being Muslim, and then those that don't practice any religion at all. So having those affinity groups really helps support the cultural competency. And then the other thing that they really do is really help us with our business strategy. So we've had a lot of affinity groups with just immensely talented individuals, and they've really helped us with our business. So for an example, we've had teams to help educate the public about clinical research, particularly as it pertains to having diversity in our clinical trials. We've had marketing teams to help. We've had, affinity groups help our marketing teams with the packaging of some of our products. We need to make sure that people that are differently abled are actually able to access their medicines when we package it. So we definitely leverage the talents of those groups as much as we possibly can. Let's see, what else do we have?
Sam, I'm not so sure that we are going to get Dr. Nacoste back at this point, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you for answering those questions. Thank you for everyone who sent those in. I greatly apologize. We are not so sure what's going on technology-wise, but it's a brand new landscape we're all working towards, and we promise that we will absolutely be working on this in the 2 weeks leading up to our next one of these. So thank you to Dr. Nacoste wherever he is, and thank you so much. A huge thank you to Sam Warren for all of your time and energy and really just taking the time to engage in such intentional and important discussions. And thank you to everyone for joining us on behalf of the NC State Alumni Association. The next session will be on September 29th at 6:30. Registration will remain open, so please encourage friends, family, and coworkers to join us. Thank you all again for your patience and grace. Good night and go Pack.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.